Welcome to EPG Pathsala. I am Sanjeev Sahu from the Department of English and Foreign Languages, Tejpur University. In this module, I am going to talk about death and material culture. I will explore the phenomenon of death, the manifestation of death across different time periods, cultures, and societies. We will also study the material culture associated with death in order to arrive at a better understanding of the social meanings of death in different cultures. First, let us try to define what is death. Death, of course, is a simple and universal phenomenon, but when looked closely, it becomes a very complex phenomenon because it can imply a plethora of meanings. The technical definition of death indicates the cessation of a biological body, or in other words, culmination of life. Death not only signifies the transformation of a body from living to being a corpse, it also brings changes ranging from legal and religious to psychological and political. However, simply put, death is the end to the functioning of the somatic fragments. Death, of course, is the ultimate truth of life, and this fact has been hitherto accepted by people of all religions and culture down the ages. The quest of human civilization has seen the evolution of mankind altogether, and the concept of death has been perceived in multifarious ways as per different customs and philosophies. Modern research are not only involved in finding new answers to define death, but also demonstrating how the people in the past conceptualize it. Death of human beings have been found to be ritualized right from the ancient times. Archaeologists have thus far discovered certain tools from burial sites, which proves that even early man had knowledge of the sensory and metaphysical existence of the body. These tools were buried along with ornaments, etc., so that they may be useful to the dead person in the afterworld. The ancient Egyptians greatly revered death as a phenomenon of moving to a greater world. They also believed that the preservation of the mortal body guarantees a prosperous afterlife. Therefore, they mummified the dead. Likewise, the ancient Chinese believed in afterlife and that a part of the spirit stayed on earth, thus giving birth to the ritual of worshipping the ancestors. Like all the great civilizations before it or contemporary to it, Greece also had its own rituals pertaining death. The ancient Greeks were highly religious people who feared the gods and goddesses more than revering them. The rituals of the ancient Greeks contain an excess of offerings to the deities in order to please them. These beliefs persisted with time, and even the great philosophers like Socrates and Plato could not escape making remarks about it. In the works of Homer, it can be seen all too well what the reality in the classical Greek looked like. The belief in reincarnation and judgment is abundantly visible in these works of literature. Moreover, certain concepts like euthanasia or mercy killing, which is still a matter of great debate in modern times, were practiced in Greece. While Pythagoras was against euthanasia because he believed it would disturb the harmony of the cycle of life, Socrates believed that euthanasia is a mode of dying to liberate oneself from intolerable or unredeemable pain. With the coming of the medieval ages all over the world, people had a fear of death much like the Romans of the classical age, and they corresponded to death as a community event. During the medieval times, the medical practices were at best crude, and therefore people suffered for a long time before dying. In fact, people died of small ailments that in modern times could have been cured. So death was a perpetual reminder, companion to people in the medieval times. Throughout the ages until very recent times, the belief of existence of the bodily spirit persisted, and it is believed by some members of all major religious orders that often now and then people claimed to have interacted with the spirits. This romanticized notion of death was predominantly visible in the 18th and 19th century when the medical practices were slowly becoming scientific and death was becoming a more fantasized affair. Death and material culture. Let us talk about death and material culture. The death of someone, or even prior to the death, has become a cultural and ritualized affair down the ages, and objects play a serious role. The said material object can be of any article used as a part of the ritual, or even the human body. The material culture in death rituals can be noticed from funeral attires that signify death to the artifact, like photograph, which strings together the memory of the dead and the living. Of course, there may be variations in these funeral attires. For example, in India, particularly among the Hindus, the white is normally worn as a funeral dress, whereas in the West, particularly among Christians, the black is considered as the proper funeral attire. These materials evoke a sense of loss and trauma and remembrance as they take the people to an interior space where the dead person is principal to all and even objectified. Elizabeth Hallam and Jenny Hockey writes about the relation of death and material culture as, I quote, "Material culture mediates our relationship with death and the dead. Objects, images, practices, as well as spaces and places call to mind or made to remind us of the deaths of others and of our own mortality." Unquote. The material objects related to the death or the dead, whether personal or public, have been subject to interpretation from various viewpoints, including personal, social, and political. The material culture attached to a certain religion or person may carry different notions in another religion or to another person. The artifact can also be an important ingredient of the politics of culture, symbolizing a position in the social and cultural hierarchy. The succeeding units of this work will endeavor to substantiate the relation of this materialistic notion of culture with the inevitable reality, that is death. Let us turn to rituals in religion. The emotions and perceptions of rituals are embellished in the sensory by the production and continuation of culture and religion. Rituals have been in practice long before any form of literary documentation was there. The meaning and interpretation may vary with the spatial and temporal moment, but the materials involved in the rituals continue to draw the attention of archaeologists, anthropologists, and the people of the societies alike. While the sensory impressions depend upon the kind of emotion it felt within a body, the rituals of death are deeply rooted in the material culture, which are signifiers of death, or in other words, metaphor. Although feelings are hard to describe, the metaphor have the ability to evoke the same sort of sensory experience felt by a person of a different era altogether. Immanuel Kant reflected for the first time that time and space have minimum impact upon the human experience, as reason transcends the spirit of individual perception, and thus human perception transcends death itself. For Hegel, the meaning of death is orchestrated by the society per se. Brent Atkins writes, I quote, "Each community commutes death differently. The organization of a community determines the role that death can play within that community. Death develops from natural negation to spiritual negation, and it also develops from the organizing principle of self-consciousness and the communities of the ethical order, and the terror to being superseded by reason as the organizing principle of both revealed religion and absolute knowing." Unquote. The social community or the organizing principle is governed by the religion that they correlate for proper functioning, and all the religions across the world consider death as sacred or eternal truth. Here, eternity varies from the notion of reincarnation to nirvana. Even here, memory plays a significant role in the institutionalization of religions and the rituals pertaining to the former. Religions do have inner divisions, but death and the sacred notions adhere beyond the differences of individual belief. It is interesting to note that most of these religions have identical ideologies regarding the justification of death and the way of dying. Most Christians believe that suffering that precedes death is atonement for the sins committed by the mortal body, and then death liberates the soul for eternal joy. Christians advocate that the suffering is given by God and no external intervention can heal them. This is termed as the sacrament of God. An important instrument here, or a part of material culture, is the scriptures. In Christianity, the reading of the last rites signifies the forgiveness sought from God before the final sleeps. Christians also believe in almsgiving in the name of the deceased. Apart from these religious facts, people also literally enact graphic crucifixion of Christ, where real people are nailed to the wooden frame, signifying the cross. The devotees undergo the crucifixions in the belief that such extreme sacrifices are a way to atone for their sin, attain miracle cures for illnesses, or express their gratitude to God. India, one of the largest countries in the world, and there are numerous death rituals that are still prevalent all over India. Hinduism is the most followed religion in India, and within Hinduism itself, there are many rituals depending on the different number of sects, cultures, and tribes. Overall, Hinduism is based on the fundamental concept of reincarnation. The Hindus cremate the body of the dead, not just to dispose the body. It is supposedly meant to release the soul of the body so that it can reincarnate or attain salvation at the end of the cycle of life. After cremating, an important point to be noted here is the collection of the skeletal remains and immersing in holy rivers like the Ganga. This act is considered necessary for the complete dispersal of the body so that the soul can either take a new form of life or meet eternity. Here we would like to draw the lens towards some of the rituals among the ethnic groups of Northeast India, which differ largely from the mainstream Hindu rituals. Most of the ethnic groups here have their own religion and culture. The Monpas, one of the indigenous groups of Arunachal, have a ritual of cutting the corpse and immersing in water for the departure of the soul. The Monpas believe that one who cuts the corpse is undertaking a pious activity equivalent to a holy pilgrimage. This practice, of course, has been well described in Yese Thongsi Dorje's novel Ho Kata Manhu. This novel is about the life of Darje Norbu, a corpse cutter. Among the Bodos, one of the largest ethnic groups in Assam, a banana tree is planted near the grave of the dead person in the belief that the deceased afterlife will be more fruitful than has been the case hitherto. When a Bodo woman dies, a peepal tree branch is planted near her grave in the hope that in her rebirth she will be blessed with a luxuriant growth of hair. These are some of the rituals connected with death ceremonies in the Northeast. Before burial or cremation, water is poured and red threads placed between the lips of the dead that will make in rebirth the lips thin and red, a sign of beauty. A certain group of people in Mongolia and Tibet follow the ritual of sky burial. According to this ritual, a body is a mere carrier of the soul, and therefore after death it becomes meaningless, since the soul, as per their belief, transmigrates to another form or body. Hence, they chop the lifeless body into pieces and place it in a mountain top, exposing it to the natural elements, which includes the scavengers. Let us turn to the practice of cannibalism. Cannibalism is practiced in certain tribes across the world, but most of these tribes have different ideologies. The Yanomamo tribe in the Amazons have a belief that the energy of the spirit remains in the skeleton of the dead. They therefore grind the skeleton after decomposing the flesh and then they burn it before finally mixing it with banana mush and eventually consuming it. This endo-cannibalism, according to some tribes like the Melanesians of Papua New Guinea and the Wari people of Brazil, are the last offerings of the people who have died, and it instigates a spiritual axiom of the living and the dead. While most of the religions observe suicide and euthanasia as shameful and sinful at best, the Japanese tradition of seppuku is perceived with a different eye. Seppuku is a death culture which the Japanese samurai or warriors used to practice as a part of the last resort of saving the honor before getting caught by the enemy, or as an act of penance of humanly unforgivable sins. The seppuku is done by ritually disemboweling the stomach with a small traditional sword called tanto. The Japanese considered seppuku and kaisaku as acts of responsibility, and these are not contemplated as suicide or murder respectively. Ritualization, remembrance, and everyday life. The hegemony of the other cultures and the standard cultures is prevalent in the discourse of loss. Hallam and Hockey structures their argument of public memory based on the defamiliarization of those cultures that languish on the periphery of the cultural map. But the archaeological and anthropological discoveries of certain discarded objects have opened them up for social, economic, and political interpretation in our contemporary era. The writers cite a graphic example in this concern. A quote, producing collages made of materials found in the street like transport tickets, used stamps, playing cards, bits of newspaper, cigarette packets. Swigert Wright stated that one can still cry out by bits of rubbish, and that is what I done by gluing and nailing them together. Nothing was left intact anyway, and the thing was to build something new out of the broken pieces. Unquote. This example resonates the interference of the public event in the personal sphere or the everyday life conjoined by the fragmental memories of the dead. Material cultures regarding death often transcend the study of merely the dead body, and the ritualized objects and the memento mori also come into consideration for the purpose of enlightening the mourning, remembrance, and cultural identity. The monuments erected in the name of the dead, including the tombstones, photographs, sculptures, etc., have become a part of the everyday life. For instance, the famous Stonehenge is seen as the symbolic of the ancient dead spirits, although the real motive of its erection is vaguely known, and people through the ages have formed their own respective beliefs attached to it. In a more relevant context, the Moidams, or the burial grounds of the Ahom Sorgadus or kings, have a historic significance. Yet they have become a common scene for the people of Assam. These Moidams, or the tombs of the kings, have been a source of reflection upon the past rituals as well as the order of hierarchy in medieval Assam. The same can be said about the pyramids of Egypt, which have become a part of the folklore as well as the modern anthropological speculation. Apart from the tombs and architecture, ballads and songs and tales printing materials have been served as memento mori or artifacts influencing or signifying the impending death. For instance, the ballads of death in the 17th century drew imagery of the grave as the final bed. In Hindu culture, the people on the deathbed are made to hear slokas from the holy Bhagavad Gita. Likewise, in Assamese culture, people organize kirtan paths as it is believed that listening to the holy scriptures will emancipate the person from pain. These instances point towards one direction: the ritual customs and their respective holy books, which are a part of everyday life, not only provide the essence of life but meaning of death as well. The global events in the form of wars and revolutions that have changed the map of the world are also signifiers of death, and with the passing of time, most of the artifacts and monuments built during the war or in the commemoration of the struggle implies to death. For instance, the India Gate in New Delhi was built in commemoration of the 82,000 soldiers who died fighting for the British India Army in World War I. The culture with time and space gets ingrained in the memory of the world population and thus becomes a unit of everyday life. Here, museums play a large role in the preservation of the artifacts, remnants of the dead, and therefore qualify as objects of memory and remembrance. The Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum is a site in Auschwitz, Germany, where we find the artifacts and the archival photos of those killed in the concentration camp. The prison barracks and the gas chambers with the visible blue satin stain of Zyklon B gas are symbolic of the number of lives that were killed inside the camp. Since the camp has been turned into a museum, people pay homage to the departed by placing flowers and wreaths on the chamber. The Mazdanek State Museum is another concentration camp turned museum where people pay homage to the victims of the Holocaust. Let us now turn to the relation between death, women, and material culture. Human civilization, for the most part, of its existence has been a patriarchal society. With time, the grieving by women have become a part of culture. The lamenting and mourning of women at the time of death implies more than what it meets the eye, and the mourning itself is densely interwoven with the cultural and social nature of the rituals. Anthropologist Nadia Ceramatakis notes that the difficulty in allocating the origin of the grieving rituals is primarily because of a lack of anecdotes about women, as well as the complexity in spatial and temporal analysis. After the death of a woman, the crying and the grieving of women offer vehicles for letting the emotions to overflow that symbolize the memory of death. The chorus oscillating between the solo mourners also signify the intensity of the pain. Clothing and jewelry are important parts of the culture of death as in life. In the Hindu customs, women were clad in white attire, suggesting the loss of color after the death of the near and departed soul. In case of widows, they are supposed to wash off the vermilion from the forehead and throw away the jewelry, implying the notion of that the deceased husband was all that the woman possessed, and now she has lost everything. Among the Christian tradition, the women wear black dresses, complete with a veil, during the funeral. During the Victorian era, there emerged special mourning jewelry to accompany with the mourning dress. Curiously enough, the world has witnessed professional mourners who mourn and grieve at funerals in exchange of money. Since mourning is thought to be essential in many cultures, professional female mourners have been garnered great demand, especially from the 20th century onwards. Mention may be made here of the Rudali group of professional mourners in India, whose life attracted stories and a film about them. Noted writer Mahasata Devi Rudali has been much acclaimed, which throws the light upon these women. Women, of course, have been subjected to intense subjugation since a long way back, and the relation of women and death have been considered ominous many a times in many forms of rituals and cultures. One ritual that has been banned in India since the colonial times, the sati, was a custom which forced mostly a new widow to self-immolate by sitting on the pyre of the husband. Although it is said that many women immolated willingly, but the ritual itself shows that women were considered the second sex as well as incomplete without men. Moreover, the identity of a woman is then downgraded to that of a material possession supposedly possessed by the man in her life, and like all materials close to him, should be burned away. Moreover, among the Hindus, belief in afterlife, which also points towards the idea that probably this custom meant to unite the two souls in the afterlife. Other societies that practiced something similar to the sati included the ancient Egyptian, the ancient Greeks, and the Scythians. In representations of death in literature calls for a close analysis. The representation of death in print has been popularized by the writings of the war, but the overall relation of it goes much beyond that. Here we can of course talk about the great war poets, poets like Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen, Isaac Rosenberg, who wrote, Rupert Brooke, who wrote during the First World War about the horrors of war and death. The relation of death and culture and the problematics of the same are all represented through the medium of language. Literature has been used since the ancient Greece to reproduce the facts and philosophies regarding life and death. The doctrines of Aristotle and Plato about the notions regarding the cycle of life and their positive outlook towards euthanasia have well been documented in words. Death has always been ever present in the thoughts of the philosophers. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Immanuel Kant justified that the attachment to death was not correspondent to individual time and space, but rather to collective memories of the culture to which it is adhered. Again, death has also been an important and essential nuance in the mind of Sigmund Freud, for death is inevitably related to desire. Albert Camus famously said that there is a time for living and time for confessing, and yet still time for writing, and it is time that betrays all. Literature is the most important vehicle or any kind of representation. Death is no other in this concern. Indeed, Camus himself put forward his notions of death through Marsault, character in The Outsider or La Stranger. In the novel, death is viewed from different perspectives. For instance, in the beginning of the novel, Marsault does not feel anything about the death of his mother, whereas later in the novel, Salamano is the one who shows dejection at the physical decay of his dog. Death in literature has arguably been best expressed ironically in the description of global events like the world wars and the terrorist strikes, be it novel or poetry. Literature has been widely enriched by the theme of death. A small poem like The Death Fugue by Paul Celan can give a horrifying description of the atrocities by the Nazi in the concentration camps. Celan, himself a victim of the Holocaust, describes the poisonous gas that were used to kill the prisoners with a term like black milk. Milk is generally associated with purity and life, something like life-giving power. But here Celan uses it as a metaphor of death in his much acclaimed poem. Anandamurti's Samskara is a tale of intense irony related to the caste system in which India goes beyond caste system in India, which goes beyond the realm of even death. The novel begins with the death of a character named Naranappa and the body of Naranappa that drives the plot. Naranappa belonged to the outcast community of Brahmin because he had taken alcohol and meat, and therefore his death begins a chain of paradoxes involving the last rites of the body. His fellow Brahmins who had excommunicated him for partaking of meat and alcohol hesitate to conduct the rites, but with a dead body of a fellow Brahmin decaying rapidly because of the climate, and with the danger of plague which will engulf the Aghara, the fellow Brahmins are caught between the devil and the deep sea. Anandamurti's tale puts a shadow of serious doubt over the sustainability of social cultural norms in front of the existence of human being. Literature can be considered as a significant source in the study of the history of a nation and how history correlates with its culture, life and death. The history of a nation becomes the catalyst in the formation of the people's mental framework, and it is generally the documentation of the traumatic events of the past collocated with personal lives that brings out the real images of the stigmata. Events that changed the map of the world, like the two world wars, the partition of India, and the 9/11 terrorist attack on the USA, are what Stanley D. Brown terms as temporal markers. Events such as these have contributed to the relocation of identities or lack thereof, and have problematized the identity of home and belongingness. Before we conclude, we can sum up what we have examined so far. Death, of course, we have seen is a natural and universal phenomenon, but it is also a socio-cultural construct which has been represented in various societies with varying rituals. Even within the same society, over a period of time, due to pressures of economics and political and even social reform, things have become rituals concerning death have become different. The imitation of death, of course, has transcended religious, cultural contexts and often been seen to be politicized and represented in art forms like films. We have also seen how death can, of course, be seen as a political, particularly in the building up and commemorated in war memorials, museums, statues. These can also become a bone of contention between different countries. For example, the Jallianwala tragedy that where in Jallianwala, several people were shot dead by the Britishers during the freedom movement. A commemorative park along with the bullet holes shown in the wall has been made, and that death has been celebrated throughout after independence. There has been repeated calls to the British government of the present era to apologize for the atrocities by the Indians, but the British government and the politicians, including the monarch, have refused categorically to apologize for that. So that death and its memorial has been a bone of contention between the two countries. A similar example can be cited between the atrocities committed by the Japanese, according to the Chinese, on the Chinese during the Second World War, with the Chinese government asking for a public apology from the Japanese authorities, including the emperor, while the Japanese on their other hand have refused to say so. So death can have many significance, and a death that has occurred many years ago can be remembered through public and private symbols and can still carry significations in the cultures. Thank you so much for listening to this unit where we discuss death and material culture. We hope we'll meet again in some other module discussing some other part. Thank you so much for listening with so much of patience. Thank you.